Alright, quick intro for this one since we're looking more deeply into book material. Okay, so there's a scene that Game of Thrones left out of the show, and I really want to talk about it. It is probably one of the darkest and most sadistic scenes in the entire book series, so be warned of graphic language ahead. Now, for show only fans, where we are at in the story is Brienne fulfilling her journey to find Sansa, and it goes a lot different in the books. Actually, the only thing from Brienne in A Feast for Crows that's in the show is that she's been tasked with looking for Sansa on behalf of Jaime and her vow to Catelyn. Everything else is essentially dropped. Where we're going to pick up with Brienne is with her at the Crossroads following a lead when she's confronted by a group of outlaws, two of which is Biter and Roarg, these guys. Roarg is actually wearing the Hound's helm. Look, these two characters are very different in the show. So the chapter in question is Brienne 7 from A Feast for Crows. I'm going to read over the last couple pages here, and then I'm going to go over why it is very important for the story going forward, why it's important for Brienne, and what Game of Thrones did instead, and why I don't think it was a better alternative at all. Let's go ahead and get into these pages. I'm going to start with Brienne being confronted by the outlaws, which reintroduces us to Roarg and Biter. The outlaws turned as one. One laughed, and another said something in a tongue Brienne did not know. The huge one with the broad white face gave a malevolent hiss. The man in the Hound's helm began to laugh. "You're even uglier than I remembered. I'd sooner rape your horse." "Horses, that's what we want," one of the wounded men said. "Fresh horses and some food. There are outlaws after us. Give us your horses and we'll be gone. We won't do you harm." "Fuck that." The outlaw in the Hound's helm yanked a battle axe off his saddle. "I want to cut her bloody legs off. I'll set her on her stump so she can watch me fuck the crossbow girl." "With what?" taunted Brienne. "Shagwell said they cut your manhood off when they took your nose." She meant it to provoke him, and it did. Bellowing curses, he came at her, his feet sending up splashes of black water as he charged. The others stood back to watch the show, as she had prayed they might. Brienne stayed as still as stone, waiting. The yard was dark, the mud slippery underfoot. Better to let him come to me. If the gods are good, he'll slip and fall. The gods were not that good, but her sword was. 5 steps, 4 steps. Now, Brienne counted, and Oathkeeper swept up to meet his rush. Steel clashed against steel as her blade bit through his rags and opened a gash in his chainmail. Even as his axe came crashing down at her, she twisted aside, slashing at his chest again as she retreated. He followed, staggering and bleeding, roaring rage. "Whore," he boomed. "Freak. Bitch. I'll give you to my dog to fuck, you bloody bitch." His axe whirled in murderous arcs, a brutal black shadow that turned silver every time the lightning flashed. Brienne had no shield to catch the blows. All she could do was slide back away from him, darting this way and that as the axe head flew at her. Once the mud gave way under her heel, and she almost fell, but somehow she recovered herself, though the axe grazed her left shoulder that time and left a blaze of pain in its wake. "You got the bitch," one of the others called, and another said, "Let's see her dance away from that one." Dance she did, relieved that they were watching. Better that than have them interfere. She could not fight 7, not alone, even if 1 or 2 were wounded. Old Sir Goodwin was long in his grave, yet she could hear him whispering in her ear. "Men will always underestimate you," he said, "and their pride will make them want to vanquish you quickly, lest it be said that a woman tried them sorely. Let them spend their strength in furious attacks, whilst you conserve your own. Wait and watch, girl. Wait and watch." She waited, watching, moving sideways, then backwards, then sideways again, slashing now at his face, now at his legs, now at his arm. His blows came more slowly as his axe grew heavier. Brienne turned him so the rain was in his eyes, and stepped back 2 steps. He wrenched his axe up once more, cursing, and lurched after her, 1 foot sliding in the mud. And she leapt to meet his rush, both hands on her sword hilt. His headlong charge brought him right onto her point, and Oathkeeper punched through cloth and mail and leather and more cloth, deep into his bowels and out his back, rasping as it scraped along his spine. His axe fell from limp fingers, and the two of them slammed together. Brienne's face matched up against the dog's head helm. She felt the cold, wet metal against her cheek. Rain ran down the steel in rivers, and when the lightning flashed again, she saw pain and fear and rank disbelief through the eye slits. "Sapphires," she whispered at him, as she gave her blade a hard twist that made him shudder. His weight sagged heavily against her, and all at once it was a corpse that she embraced. There in the black rain, she stepped back and let him fall, and Biter crashed into her, shrieking. He fell on her like an avalanche of wet wool and milk-white flesh, lifting her off her feet and slamming her down into the ground. She landed in a puddle with a splash that sent water up her nose and into her eyes. All the air was driven out of her, and her head snapped down against some half-buried stone with a crack. "No," was all that she had time to say before he fell on top of her, his weight driving her deeper into the mud. One of his hands was in her hair, pulling her head back. The other groped for her throat. Oathkeeper was gone, torn from her grasp. She had only her hands to fight him off, but when she slammed a fist into his face, it was like punching a ball of wet, white dough. He hissed at her. She hit him again, smashing the heel of her hand into his eye, but he did not seem to feel her blows. She clawed at his wrists, but his grip just grew tighter, though blood ran from the gouges where she scratched him. He was crushing her, smothering her. She pushed at his shoulders to get him off her, but he was heavy as a horse, impossible to move. When she tried to knee him in the groin, all she did was drive her knee into his belly. Grunting, Biter tore out a handful of her hair. "My dagger." Brienne clutched at the thought, desperate. She worked her hand down between them, fingers squirming under his sour, suffocating flesh, searching until they finally found the hilt. Biter locked both his hands about her neck and began to slam her head against the ground. The lightning flashed again, this time inside her skull, yet somehow her fingers tightened, pulled the dagger from its sheath. With him on top of her, she could not raise the blade to stab, so she drew it hard across his belly. Something warm and wet gushed between her fingers. Biter hissed again, louder than before, and let go of her throat just long enough to smash her in the face. She heard the bones crack, and the pain blinded her for an instant. When she tried to slash him again, he wrenched the dagger from her fingers and slammed a knee down onto her forearm, breaking it. Then he seized her head again and resumed trying to tear it off of her shoulders. Brienne could hear dog barking, and men were shouting all about her. In between the claps of thunder, she heard the clash of steel on steel. Ser Hyle, she thought. Ser Hyle has joined the fight, but all that seemed far away and unimportant. Her world was no larger than the hands at her throat and the face that loomed above her. The rain ran off his hood as he leaned closer. His breath stank like cheese gone rotten. Brienne's chest was burning, and the storm was blinding her eyes, blinding her. Bones ground against each other inside of her. Biter's mouth gaped open, impossibly wide. She saw his teeth, yellow and crooked, filed to points. When they closed on the soft meat of her cheek, she hardly felt it. She could feel herself spiraling down into the dark. "I cannot die yet," she told herself. "There is something I still need to do." Biter's mouth tore free, full of blood and flesh. He spat, grinned, and sank his pointed teeth into her flesh again. This time he chewed and swallowed. "He is eating me," she realized. But she had no strength left to fight him any longer. She felt as if she were floating above herself, watching the horror as if it were happening to some other woman, to some stupid girl who thought she was a knight. "It will be finished soon," she told herself. "Then it will not matter if he eats me." Biter threw back his head and opened his mouth again, howling, and stuck his tongue out at her. It was sharply pointed, dripping blood, longer than any tongue should be, sliding from his mouth, out and out and out, red and wet and glistening. It made a hideous sight, obscene. His tongue is a foot long, Brienne thought, just before the darkness took her. Why, it looks almost like a sword. Okay, and that's where the chapter ends. So there's a lot there, but let me try to simplify this as much as I can from just a surface level. It's a pretty claustrophobic situation for Brienne, but fortunately, the fight comes at her one man at a time, and I really like that she references Sir Goodwin, which was her master at arms back on Tarth. And to pay that off, she utilizes her training and provoking Rourke with insults to get him to come after her quickly while she patiently and strategically defeats him as he wears himself down. Brienne always experienced this to be true. Men would want to defeat her quickly, causing them to exert themselves early into the fight. This is good to hear about her training, but then to experience her utilizing it in the real world is a real payoff. But the thing is, all sword training goes out the window when she's ambushed by Biter. And this is where Brienne as a character became so very real to me. And on subsequent readings, it makes me appreciate her even more. We experience the inner thinking and feeling of a character who has been trying this whole book to serve others with nobility, and where codes of honor and morals conflict, Brienne is consistent in doing the next right thing. But she's fearful. She's been physically hurt. She's a human being fighting for her life, and ultimately, she's accepting death. This made Brienne become so human to me. We all have concerns or nervousness about dying, and I can't imagine a more vulnerable experience. Brienne questioning her whole purpose and considering herself foolish to believe a girl should be in her situation. This is all compounded by the horrific nature in which she's being attacked. When she says, "He's eating me," it reads like such a whimpering, sadness, and terror. Brienne wants to do what is right, and her determination to do this and this singular focus insists that she is confronted with horror on the opposite side of the spectrum. Unlike being defeated honorably in battle, for Brienne to fall in a fight, she is always confronted with the threat of further assault, typically that of the sexual nature. All the rules say she should not be here, and yet there's nobody more determined to do the right thing than Brienne. But the chapter ends with what appears to be her death, a death she is accepting as a failure of her journey. I'll come back to this in just a second, because Game of Thrones left this all out, and I want to discuss why. So sure, in the show, the fight between Brienne and the Hound was pretty brutal, and even though it strayed far from the book material, the conclusion for the Hound was similar enough, and the show really focuses on the Hound and Arya after the fight. The problem with this is that by just latching Brienne into Arya and the Hound's plot, the fight and the aftermath have almost no impact on Brienne's arc. She's not critically injured, she's not really faced with anything more than a physical fight, but it doesn't further develop her. It doesn't show her utilizing the strategy that she learned from Sir Goodwin. It doesn't offer a life lesson or any type of perspective that the character can carry forward with her after this. In the show, Brienne has no conflict of morals or oaths, and she never has to come back from failure stronger because she has no failures. Even with the death of Renly in the show feeling like a failure, even with Catelyn dying at the Red Wedding, these things get mentioned as moments Brienne feels she failed to protect those she served, but it doesn't change anything for her character. The beauty of Brienne in A Feast for Crows is that we follow her along as she is trying to fulfill her purpose honorably, but then this leads her to a very dark place. She's being eaten alive, her arm is broken, and bones in her face and chest seem to be grinding against each other or fracture. She has real consequences for failure. She has real tests of her values. Game of Thrones has none of that, and I truly believe that when they had Brienne fight the Hound and basically walk away unfazed, the show did not care about where George R. R. Martin was taking this character at all anymore. So where was George R. R. Martin taking her exactly? Well, I said I'd come back to this point. Brienne's 7th chapter ends with her facing the physical adversity for her journey. Brienne lives as a true knight, and she holds herself to the standards of a true knight, when every actual knight we've encountered in this story seems much more flexible in their oaths and their honor. The reason so many of them are flexible in this regard is merely self-interest and also self-preservation. Brienne is only in the position she's in due to her devotion to keep her word to Catelyn Stark, to keep her word to Jaime, and for Jaime's behalf in regard to his oath, as she carries Oathkeeper on her side to fulfill this mission. But she's also a woman who's been considered out of her depth and in an inappropriate situation as a highborn woman. I think it's why she calls herself a foolish girl as she is being attacked by Biter. She's questioning herself. This is her whole identity being confronted with the harshest reality. The physicality required for the life she wants to lead is right here and now in the form of Biter, and it's ugly. This is the confrontation and obstacle she must face, and she has, but it might kill her. Leaving this out of the show because it was too dark is one thing, but I think it could have been left in and just tiled down a little bit. But they didn't leave it out for any other reason other than it was a part of a bigger plot that they decided to scrap as well. This would have been the Lady Stoneheart plot with Jaime and Brienne. And this is where I think after getting through the physical obstacles, Brienne is facing now a moral dilemma, and I'll be touching on this in my next Brienne video, which will be posted here in the future. But in the meantime, keep in mind, Brienne's story is very much connected to Jaime, and I'm going to touch on that a little bit in this video right here.